You trust mathematics, right? 1 plus 1 will always be 2. It's the foundation of universal truth, free from opinions and uncertainties. At least, that's what humanity thought until the beginning of the 20th century. Then, a shy, paranoid, and absolutely brilliant man emerged in Vienna. He took logic itself and used it against itself, proving once and for all that there are truths in our universe that mathematics is incapable of proving. Today, we'll delve into the labyrinthine mind of Kurt Gödel, the man who proved that human knowledge has an insurmountable limit and who paid a terrible price for this discovery. The Greatest Mathematicians of All Time, Episode 25, Kurt Gödel. Kurt Gödel was born on April 28, 1906, in Brunn, Austria-Hungary, present-day Brno, Czech Republic, and died on January 14, 1978, in Princeton, New Jersey, United States. Kurt Gödel's father was Rudolf Gödel, whose family originated from Vienna. Rudolf did not pursue his academic studies as a young man, but prospered, becoming managing director and partner of a major textile company in Brunn. Kurt's mother, Marianne Handschuh, was from the Rhineland and the daughter of Gustav Handschuh, who also worked in the textile industry in Brunn. Rudolf was 14 years older than Marianne, who, unlike him, had a literary background and had completed part of her studies in France. Rudolf and Marianne Gödel had 2 children, both boys. The eldest was named Rudolf, after his father, and the youngest, Kurt. Kurt had a fairly happy childhood. He was very attached to his mother, but seemed somewhat shy and disturbed when she wasn't home. At age 6, he had rheumatic fever, but after recovering, his life continued practically as before. However, at age 8, he began reading medical books about the disease that afflicted him and discovered that a weak heart was a possible complication. Although there is no proof that he actually had a weak heart, Kurt became convinced that he did, and concern for his health became a constant in his life. Kurt studied in Brno, completing his studies in 1923. His brother Rudolf said, "Even in high school, my brother was a bit more one-sided than I was, and to the astonishment of his teachers and classmates, he already mastered university-level mathematics in his final years of gymnasis. Mathematics and languages were ranked much higher than literature and history. At the time, rumors circulated that throughout his high school years, not only did his Latin assignments always receive the highest marks, but he hadn't made a single grammatical error." Gödel entered the University of Vienna in 1923, still undecided whether he wanted to specialize in mathematics or theoretical physics. He took classes with Furtwängler, Hahn, Wirtinger, Menger, Helly, and others. Furtwängler's classes were the most impactful on him, and because of them he decided to choose mathematics as his main area of study. There were 2 reasons. Furtwängler was an exceptional mathematician and teacher, but in addition he was a quadriplegic, so he taught from a wheelchair with an assistant who wrote on the board. This would have a great impact on any student, but on Gödel, who was very conscious of his own health, it had an even greater influence. As a graduate student, Gödel attended a seminar taught by Schlick, which studied Russell's book, Introduction to Mathematical Philosophy. Olga Taussky-Todd wrote, Gradually, it became obvious that he would dedicate himself to logic, that he would be a student of Hahn and not of Schlick, and that he was incredibly talented. His help was much sought after. He completed his doctorate under Hahn's supervision in 1929, presenting a thesis that demonstrated the completeness of first-order functional calculus. He became a faculty member at the University of Vienna in 1930, where he belonged to the School of Logical Positivism until 1938. Gödel's father died in 1929, and thanks to the success of his business, the family became financially stable. After her husband's death, Gödel's mother bought a large apartment in Vienna, and her two sons moved in with her. By this time, Gödel's older brother was already a successful radiologist. As mentioned earlier, Gödel's mother had a literary background and could now enjoy Viennese culture, especially the theatre, in the company of Rudolf and Kurt.
Gödel is best known for his proof of the Gödel incompleteness theorems. In 1931, he published these results in On Formally Undecidable Propositions of Principia Mathematica and Related Systems. He proved fundamental results about axiomatic systems, demonstrating that in any axiomatic mathematical system, there are propositions that cannot be proven or disproven within the axioms of the system. In particular, the consistency of the axioms cannot be proven. This put an end to 100 years of attempts to establish axioms that would ground all of mathematics on axiomatic foundations. One of the main attempts was made by Bertrand Russell with Principia Mathematica, 1910-1913. Another was Hilbert's formalism, which suffered a severe blow with Gödel's results. The theorem did not destroy the fundamental idea of formalism, but it demonstrated that any system would have to be more comprehensive than the one idealized by Hilbert. Gödel's results were a landmark in 20th century mathematics, showing that mathematics is not a finished object, as was believed. This also implies that a computer can never be programmed to answer all mathematical questions. Gödel met Zermelo in Bad Elster in 1931. Olga Tauski-Todd, who was present at the same meeting, wrote, "Zermelo's problem was that he believed he had already achieved Gödel's most admired result. Scholz seemed to think that this was indeed the case, but he had not announced it, and perhaps never would." The peaceful meeting between Zermelo and Gödel in Bad Elster was not the beginning of a scientific friendship between two logicians. Upon submitting his paper on incompleteness to the University of Vienna for his habilitation, it was accepted by Hahn on December 1, 1932. Gödel became a Privatdozent at the University of Vienna in March 1933.
1933 was the year Hitler came to power. Initially, this had no effect on Gödel's life in Vienna. He had little interest in politics. In 1934, Gödel gave a series of lectures at Princeton entitled On Undecidable Propositions of Formal Mathematical Systems. At Veblen's suggestion, Kleene, who had just completed his doctoral thesis at Princeton, took notes on these lectures, which were later published. However, Gödel suffered a nervous breakdown upon returning to Europe and phoned his brother Rudolf from Paris to say he was ill. He was treated by a psychiatrist and spent several months in a sanatorium recovering from depression. Despite his health problems, Gödel's research progressed well, and he obtained important results on the consistency of the axiom of choice with the other axioms of set theory in 1935. However, after the assassination of Schlick,
whose seminar had sparked Gödel's interest in logic by a National Socialist student in 1936, Gödel was deeply shaken and suffered another nervous breakdown. His brother Rudolf wrote, "This event was certainly the reason why my brother went through a serious nervous crisis for some time, which obviously was a cause of great concern, especially for my mother." Soon after his recovery, he received his first invitation to a visiting professorship in the USA. He visited Göttingen in the summer of 1938, where he gave lectures on his research in set theory. He returned to Vienna and married Adele Porkert in the autumn of 1938. In fact, he had met her in 1927 at the Der Nachtfalter nightclub in Vienna. She was 6 years older than Gödel and had already been married, and both his parents, but especially his father, opposed the idea of them marrying. She was not the first young woman Gödel's parents opposed. The first one he had met, around the time he entered university, was 10 years older than him.
In March 1938, Austria became part of Germany. But Gödel didn't mind much and continued his life normally. He visited Princeton for the second time, spending the first semester of the 1938-39 academic year at the Institute for Advanced Study. In the second semester of that academic year, he delivered an excellent lecture course at Notre Dame. Most of those who held the title of Privatdozent in Austria became paid professors after the annexation of the country by Germany, but Gödel did not. His application, made on September 25, 1939, received a lukewarm response. Apparently, they thought he was Jewish, but in fact, this was completely wrong, although he had many Jewish friends. Others also mistook him for a Jew, and he was even attacked by a group of young men who mistook him for a Jew while walking with his wife in Vienna. When the war began, Gödel feared being drafted into the German army. Of course, he was also convinced that his health was too fragile to serve in the army, but if he could be mistaken for a Jew, he could also be mistaken for a healthy man. He was unwilling to take that risk, and after lengthy negotiations to obtain an American visa, he was fortunate enough to be able to return to the United States, although he had to travel via Russia and Japan to do so. His wife accompanied him. In 1940, Gödel arrived in the United States, becoming an American citizen in 1948. In fact, he believed he had found an inconsistency in the United States Constitution, but the judge had enough common sense not to hear him during the interview. He was a regular member of the Institute for Advanced Study from 1940 to 1946, with annual terms renewed each year, and then became a permanent member until 1953. He held a professorship at Princeton from 1953 until his death, with a contract that explicitly prevented him from teaching. One of Gödel's closest friends at Princeton was Einstein. They both held each other in high regard and conversed frequently. It is unclear how much Einstein influenced Gödel's work on relativity, but he did contribute to that field. He received the Einstein Prize in 1951 and the National Medal of Science in 1974. He was a member of the United States National Academy of Sciences, a member of the Royal Society, a member of the Institut de France, a member of the British Academy, and an honorary member of the London Mathematical Society. However, the fact that he refused admission to the Vienna Academy of Sciences
and later, when elected an honorary member, refused the honor again, says a lot about his feelings towards Austria. He also refused the highest national medal for scientific and artistic achievements that Austria offered him. Certainly, he felt resentful of the treatment he received, but equally so of the treatment given to his family.
Gödel's mother had left Vienna before him, returning to her home in Brno in 1937, where she became openly critical of the National Socialist regime. Gödel's brother, Rudolf, had remained in Vienna, but in 1944 they both foresaw the German defeat, and Rudolf's mother joined him in Vienna. By virtue of the treaty negotiated after the war between the Austrians and Czechs, she received 1/10 of the value of her house in Brno. It was an injustice that enraged Gödel. In fact, he always took such injustices personally, even if a large number of people suffered in the same way. After settling in the United States, Gödel returned to producing works of great importance. His masterpiece, Consistency of the Axiom of Choice and the Generalized Continuum Hypothesis with the Axioms of Set Theory, 1940, is a classic of modern mathematics. In it, he proved that if an axiomatic system of set theory of the type proposed by Russell and Whitehead in Principia Mathematica is consistent, it will remain so when the axiom of choice and the generalized continuum hypothesis are added to the system. This did not prove that these axioms were independent of the other axioms of set theory. But when this was finally established by Cohen in 1963, he based it on these ideas of Gödel. Concerns about his health became increasingly distressing for Gödel as the years passed. Gödel's brother, Rudolf, was a doctor, so the medical details he provided below will be accurate. He wrote, "My brother had a very particular and inflexible opinion about everything and was hardly convinced otherwise. Unfortunately, he believed all his life that he was always right, not only in mathematics, but also in medicine, which made him a very difficult patient for doctors. After a severe hemorrhage caused by a duodenal ulcer, he followed an extremely strict, perhaps even too strict, diet for the rest of his life, which caused him to gradually lose weight. Gödel's wife, Adele, was a great support to him and did much to alleviate the tensions that afflicted him. However, she herself began to suffer health problems, having 2 strokes and undergoing major surgery. At the end of his life, Gödel became convinced that he was being poisoned, and refusing to eat to avoid poisoning, essentially died of starvation."
Of slight stature and very meticulous, Kurt Gödel was generally concerned about his health and did not travel or give many lectures in the last years of his life. He had no doctoral students, but through correspondence and personal contact with the constant succession of visitors to Princeton, many people benefited from his extremely agile and incisive mind. A friend of Einstein, von Neumann, and Morgenstern, he particularly enjoyed philosophical discussions. He died sitting in a chair in his hospital room in Princeton on the afternoon of January 14, 1978. It would be fair to say that Gödel's ideas changed the course of mathematics. It seems clear that the fecundity of his ideas will continue to stimulate new work. Few mathematicians receive this kind of immortality. Kurt Gödel left us with an uncomfortable legacy. He showed us that no matter how sophisticated our logical systems become, there will always be truths beyond our reach. Absolute certainty is an illusion. And this makes me wonder,
Is this incompleteness a flaw in the universe, or is it precisely what makes the pursuit of knowledge so fascinating? If your mind was also tied in knots by this genius's story, leave a like on the video. And tell me in the comments, do you think that one day artificial intelligence will be able to overcome the limits that Gödel discovered? Or will they also be bound by the same rules? Subscribe to the channel for more stories that challenge reality. Until next time.